My name is Tony Porcelli, and I'm an assistant dean in Hofstra University's School of Health Professions and Human Services. This afternoon's event, iDisorder, the emerging trend of tech addiction among Generation Z, is being presented by Dr. Jamie Midas. Dr. Midas is the department chair for Hofstra University's Department of Counseling and Mental Health Professions. It is my absolute pleasure, and with the utmost thanks, that I now give the floor to Dr. Jamie Midas for this afternoon's presentation. Dr. Midas, please.
Thank you, Tony. And I want to thank Tony for all of the coordination of this event today, because I know it takes a lot to put all these different types of presentations together. So thank you so much, Tony. I'd like to welcome you all today. And as Tony said, I am a professor in the Counseling and Mental Health Professions Department. My background comes out of rehabilitation psychology and rehabilitation counseling. And I'm very, very glad to be able to be here today to talk with you about what I feel is a very important topic. I'll tell you a little bit about my interest in it. I will tell you that this is a newer area of interest for me that I am intending to begin to develop a research agenda around. I have been participating in various trainings over the last couple of years, and having my own personal experience with a tween, it really has driven a good significant amount of my interest in wanting to address this topic. And I'm looking forward to hearing what it's been like for some of you as well, in terms of what you're seeing as you're engaging with Gen Z and how they're going about using technology. The one thing I can tell you from my own personal experience is that I have a 12-year-old who happens to have ADHD. And so in the last 2 years, as most tweens do get, is they get their iPhone or they get their smartphone. And so what you tend to see is a bit of a shift in terms of what their interests are. And so me hearing from a lot of the people that I know, anecdotally hearing similar stories of challenges just in terms of trying to manage and help their young ones develop good, healthy habits in terms of how to relate to their technology. So as such, as I said, today's presentation is just going to really be an overview of what tech addiction is. We are going to talk a little bit about the symptoms you might observe in someone you might suspect has issues with tech addiction. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the modalities of treatment that are being utilized to address tech addiction. And in saying that, I really want to point out that this is a very young area of treatment, and is still very much in development. So when you look at the research, what you'll tend to find is that it's very new. Most of what I have looked at is over the last 10 years. It's not to say that it hasn't been around prior to the last 10 years, but with the mobility devices that we have today, unlike traditionally when we had desktops where you were sort of stationed at one place, our devices are on us at all times. And so this issue is proliferating within the population and globally speaking. To get us started, though, I would like to try and do a poll with you. This is my first time using the poll function in Zoom, and I have specifically 3 questions in the poll that I'm going to launch in a sec. And then I have one question that's more in the chat room because it's not a yes/no answer. It's more of an open-ended answer. And if you can just take a moment to answer those, hopefully I can pull up the results. I'll ask for Tony's help if I struggle, and we'll see where it takes us. So let me go ahead and launch the poll. If you can take a moment to answer that, and I'm going to also in the chat box put the other question. We have about 78% who have voted so far or completed the poll. I'll just give it till like a few more seconds. Okay. All right, so based on the responses, I'm not sure if you can see them, so I'm going to say them. The first question is, are you familiar with iDisorder? And about 30% of you said you are, whereas 70% of you said you are not. So this doesn't at all surprise me because, again, this is a newer area in which we're addressing addiction. So hopefully after today, especially for those of you who may not know too much about it, you'll walk away having a better understanding. And for those of you who are familiar, you'll know more than what you knew before. The second question, do you ever worry about how much you are on your devices? About 61% of you said you do, and 39% said you are not. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about that in terms of what is the bordering point that creates that worry for some of you. And then the third question, do you know someone you believe is on their devices too much? Oh, wow. That one, 87% said yes, with only 13% saying no. So if we don't see it in ourselves, we're certainly seeing it in other people that we know, which is of course concerning, I'm sure. So hopefully, again, with what you walk away with today from this presentation will give you some guidance on perhaps how you want to handle this topic going forward. Then in terms of the actual devices, so in the chat box, just go ahead and close that pull up. In the chat box, my question was essentially, what apps or games do you find most challenging to set limits in using? And we've got a variety of answers. If you just kind of breeze through it a little bit, you'll see some individuals have said TikTok with news feeds, some solitaire, Snapchat, TikTok again, email checking, absolutely. How many of us have the little alarm that goes off every time we get another email or a text for that matter? TikTok coming up again, Reddit, which is sort of like a blog with different kinds of groups that are based on your areas of interest. We have YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube again, email. So I think Tinder on there too. So I think what we can see is that this seems to be a split between social media platforms as well as I'm not really seeing gaming so much around this group, but YouTube certainly. I know that one quite well myself. And just our standard email, whether we're emailing or texting our friends, our family, and so forth. And so, again, if you think about yourself and what things were like 10 years ago, would you even be answering this way today in this question? Probably not. Probably your habits have changed over time, let alone those of others whom you know. So let's go ahead and we'll get started talking about this topic a little bit. Although hold on a second, I think I have a message. One more person adding in TikTok, Snapchat, and so forth. Thank you very much for responding to that. So you may be wondering why I chose to focus in on Gen Z in particular. Not to say that this is an issue that can cut across developmentally the lifespan. It can impact any of us at any point in time. But my focus, of course, wanted to hone in on Gen Z because there are some unique considerations with that generation that are a bit different than the generations ahead of us. And I'll explain that in just a moment. First, let's talk about who Gen Z is. So if we look at the PowerPoint slide here, you'll see that these are individuals who are also referred to as Gen Alpha, and that they are generally born between roughly 1995 up till 2012, 2015. So we're talking about anyone that's in their 20s down to someone who is roughly 5 to 6 years old. And so that, is quite a spread in terms of developmentally where they're at in the stage of life. They are considered to be digitally native. And this is mostly because they've had exposure to technology since they were essentially toddlers or like very, very early childhood. And that's one of the features that's very different from other generations, like my own generation or even millennials, where tech would have come in a little bit later for them in their life. And so the reason for the importance of that has to do with brain development. When you're giving devices to a 5-year-old as opposed to someone going on for the first time at 18, our brains are at very different points in time of their development. And so for Gen Z, it's of particular concern because these devices are, in a sense, being webbed within the makeup of their brain structure, which is one of the concerns we're seeing in research that's being done using MRI imaging and looking at the activity of brains of individuals who use a lot of tech to those who do not. We also know that this population is much more diverse than any of the generations that are ahead of them. And that they also tend to be moving towards more education. And this is looking more at that upper end of the Gen Z, because obviously if you're only 5, you haven't made it that far along yet in your educational career. So, but it does appear that they're on track for that. And as I said, the heightened concern for Gen Z is really this idea of the amount of exposure that they're getting in their formative years. It used to be that you didn't get a phone until you were a freshman in high school. Then that moved down to, junior high. Then you would get your smartphone. And now we're seeing kids who are getting it when they're in 4th grade, 5th grade, even in some cases younger than that. And so again, as I had just mentioned, the concern is about how that's impacting the brain. Specifically, we're talking about dopamine and the way that it impacts the prefrontal cortex, where dopamine is housed. The concern is that much like other addictions in the case of substance use, opioids, alcohol, cocaine, that the amount of usage on your technology is actually activating the same centers in the brain that creates impulsivity and judgment issues and such. So this creates issues with potential regulation. And when you're, say, a teenager at 17, 18, and you haven't had a device until that point in time, you've gone long enough that you've acquired the development to be able to regulate your activity and your behavior. But when you're getting a device when you're 5 years old, you haven't developed that ability to regulate. So it's easier to slip into the impulsivity of using the tech and having a harder time breaking away from it. So this is, again, one of the primary reasons why we have concern with respect to this generation. So what I'm going to do is I want to do a new share with you to show a quick video clip that's about 2 minutes long. Just bear with me as I find it. And it's going to essentially illustrate what I've just spoken about in terms of the brain function. Okay, just want to bring this up. I'm hoping you can all see this.
The American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic manual includes internet gaming disorder as a condition requiring further study. And Dr. David Rosenberg is doing just that.
The internet can be a wonderful servant, but it's a cruel and crippling master, where literally the brain gets hijacked. And what we see is major problems with executive functioning, how to make good decisions.
We don't really hear about it in this country. In fact, we have a pretty robust and loud population saying there's no such thing.
A big part of that really is semantics, because There are symptoms. Internet addiction clearly exists, but there's always an underlying cause.
Josh is getting a functional MRI as part of a new study by Dr. David Rosenberg. His theory, yet to be proven, is that excessive gaming changes brain activity. These triplets are in the study too.
Turn it off now.
Stop,
You're
Mom.
still playing.
I said I'm gonna watch. Instead, I'm gonna go play outside with Josh.
I told you
I'm gonna go play outside with Josh.
That's Noah. You can see why his mom says gaming has more of a hold on him than on his brother and sister. These are the triplets' brain scans. 2 are typical, but Noah's is not. Dr. Rosenberg highlighted areas in red he says represent brain activity involving memory, attention, and decision-making.
Noah's is almost completely gray.
But now look at Noah's brain after 3 weeks unplugged at summer camp.
He's gone from being barely lit up to being highly.
He's highly lit up. Yeah.
Now for Josh's results.
This is a 14-year-old child who has rather severe internet addiction. There should be much more activity.
There should be more red.
There should be more red.
What is it telling you?
That's telling us that he's having more difficulty performing higher level functioning, that his executive function is severely impaired, and compared to others who don't have internet addiction, he's less able to process, his brain conductor isn't working properly.
A couple days later, Josh has a follow-up brain scan. Dr. David Rosenberg shows us the results.
Wow. What you can see here is, this is an oh wow effect.
Same boy.
Same boy.
Before treatment, after treatment. What is that telling you?
He was completely shut down. When we talked with him here, he was exuberant, a different child.
Okay. All right. Give me a second here. And we'll go back to the PowerPoint.
Jamie, I got a question real fast.
Sure.
Sorry. So when you talk about internet addiction, is it just strictly like internet and the apps, or are you just talking about screens in front of you for long periods of time, like a TV as well?
TV operates a little bit differently. So if you remember how I was saying that one of the issues is the mobility of the devices now, whereas TV is something that's quite stationary. Also, TVs do not, they do not insert within them reward mechanisms the way that your devices do. And you're going to see in a minute what defines iDisorder, but we're talking a lot about social media. We're talking a lot about gaming. Yes, we're talking about YouTube, those types of functions too. TV, there are concerns with that too, because it's still a screen per se. And just from a health perspective, both, even more physical health, it promotes sedentary lifestyle, which, we know being more active is healthy both physically and mentally. But here today, we're really concentrating on more your devices, like your Nintendo Switches, and again, all the gaming mechanisms and the Xboxes and the Facebook, Facebooking and all of that. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So moving forward, and if you want to speak up, that's absolutely fine. If you can just introduce or say your name so I know who I'm speaking to, I would appreciate that. So on this slide here, what you'll see is these are some of the terms that I have seen being used in reference to the same thing. One important point, though, is that presently, right now, psychology, psychiatry, mental health counseling, creative arts therapy, MFT, all of us, we utilize the Diagnostic Statistical Manual to be able to identify the diagnosis in a client, and then use that for the purposes of treatment planning. However, the DSM-5 right now does not acknowledge internet addiction or iDisorder or any of it. As you saw in the video clip, it is under consideration for a future manuals, but it is presently not in there. What I can tell you is that the World Health Organization came out about 2 years ago, maybe a little less than that, and they have identified gaming disorder. part of the drive for that is when you look globally across the world, countries, especially Asian countries in particular, they are really sort of the trendsetters of bringing forward the recognition that this is a problem. And in many respects, it makes sense, because when you look at some of those countries, like for example, in Japan, where you have anime, that's really, really a big part of that culture. Gaming has been significant. And so they're already ahead of the game in front of us as far as creating treatment centers and facilities to try and address these issues, because it's become so prolific in those countries. But this is growing everywhere. And especially now that we have COVID-19, it's in some respects, based on what I've read, tripled or doubled in terms of usage for some individuals. So on the next slide here, what you'll see are some of the statistics I have read through various articles and such, and it ranges. I think that's the big thing you'll notice in terms of the numbers, in terms of the usage or the prevalence of iDisorder. Anywhere, as that first point says, 3% to 38%, which is a very significant range of difference in terms of usage. But looking more specific to the US and Europe, ranging there too between 1.5% to 18.5%. But you can see that the average media use, based on kind of looking collectively at various articles that I read, it seems to hover around 9 hours a day, and that's not including school time. That's outside of school time. And what you'll tend to find, at least I have, in individuals who are having significant issues with this, they're gaming or they're on social media 16, 18 hours, 20 hours a day. And that has significant impact on their overall health and mental state. So this is definitely an issue. Now, one of the reasons why the numbers vary so much is partly because how iDisorder is defined. There is not one definition to this disorder right now. And part of that is the reason why I think World Health Organization finally came out and said, we are acknowledging this as being an issue. And I also think once the DSM puts it on paper, giving, the symptoms and such, that will help to create a more consistent definition to the disorder. And in addition is the way that it's being assessed in different studies, and obviously in different clinics across the world. So right now there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of what makes up the definition, that I think in part is feeding into the variability of the numbers. But the important thing to know is that these numbers are going up, and that's the issue. And if you look at the picture that I have, yes, this is funny in some respects. They're playing tag through the use of their phones, but I really hope we never get to that point. All right, and so on this page, I've actually tried to provide for you a definition that was put out by the Betty Ford Foundation. As you know, Betty Ford herself had alcoholism. She had issues with alcoholism. So they provide assistance for addiction, and incorporating technology. It's the same concept where you have this frequent or obsessive tech-related behavior that it's increasing in practice, and it creates negative consequences to the user of the tech. So in some way, shape, or form, this is impacting on other areas of the person's life. Okay. So moving along, then the question becomes, in what way does iDisorder appear? So this gets back to the question that was just asked a little earlier. Hold on one second. I gotta move. I'll get us back there in a minute. Just need to move my board. Okay, there we go. All right, so from looking at, again, the different research, these are some of the ways of which it's being defined or what it's incorporating into the definitions. So, obviously gaming is one of the ones that's at the top of this, but and also social media, like I said before. But we can also see online pornography as being a part of that, or engaging in cyber sexual activity. That's certainly a part of it. The surfing, I actually wanted to point out to you with respect to that, because surfing requires scrolling. And the gentleman who actually created scrolling, his name is Aza Raskin. And you'll find him on the internet now, in some respects regretting that he ever came up with that function and sold it off to Facebook or Twitter, because that in part has contributed to this compulsion to want to stay online and continue to look for the next thing, and to look for the next thing, and to look for the next thing. And so, one thing you will find interestingly is that there are individuals from Silicon Valley who no longer are working in some of these companies that are coming out about the importance of needing ethical technology that accounts for more human interaction with it, because they are now seeing the negative consequences of what they've created. And so he's one of those individuals who's acknowledging that. So the surfing, with that scrolling function, promotes the continuation of looking for more and more. And what oftentimes is happening is they're also inserting little messaging that will activate your dopamine, so that it continues to draw you in to want more and more. So it's very strategic in the way that they insert certain messaging to promote the activation of the dopamine. We see this also within gaming. If any of you play Fortnite, or you play Minecraft's a little different, but many of these games have what is called leveling up. And so what happens in the brain is that when someone's using and playing for a long time, the brain habituates to that level. And so that dopamine, in a sense, is no longer enough to stimulate and excite the individual to play any further. They need to level up to the next level, to get more rewards and so forth. And so the way games are designed, they're designed to promote this leveling up in order to keep you playing the game, because if you keep playing the game, then that's more profitability for the company. So we really have a double-edged sword. You've got the one end of it where you have the user who's getting caught into this to a level that's non-functional for them anymore, but you also have the developers of a lot of this technology that quite frankly know what they're doing. But as a result, some are coming out now with recognizing we need to be doing this differently to reduce the likelihood of this addictive behavior that comes out of it. So we see gambling as a part of that. We see shopping, as being a part of that. And as I said before, we also see the social media platforms involved in that as well. Are there any questions so far before I continue on?
Yes, my name is Marilyn Michon. I put this in the chat. How do you differentiate between eye addiction and sex/porn addiction?
Well, that's a very good question, because that's actually what they are struggling with in terms of defining for the DSM. So they haven't worked that out yet. So the question is, does this stand as a disorder of its own and should be classified as, eye disorder or tech addiction? Or does it fall underneath, these other categories? So we don't have the answer to that question yet, Marilyn. I hope, we will get some clarification on that, because the sooner they can tease that out, the sooner we can get it into the book, and the sooner we can get moving more heavily in terms of treatment modalities for it. But we don't have that worked out yet from what I could see.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the symptoms of eye disorder, these are some of the characteristics that you might witness. And I'm going to show you a clip in another video to illustrate this. But essentially, what you might tend to see in the person, and think about, most of you said that you knew someone you had concern about. So as you're looking at these symptoms, think to yourself, is that person that I know, or even myself, do I kind of see this in myself? So you tend to spend, several hours on the device throughout the day. Does it leak into your work time? Does it leak into your school time? We see things like, for example, in schools, they have implemented programs like Go Guardian, which is intended to make sure that students are not deviating into a game or onto Instagram while they're in class. So paying attention to how much time is being spent. As a result of being online, is there a shift in the mood? What you'll sometimes see is that a person who's been on for a while, they can get kind of cranky, when they are pulled off the device, almost like a mini withdrawal. So there may be a shift in mood. And I can tell you that there is data to show that the more a person is online using, the more likely they are to have issues of anxiety and depression. So that correlation has been shown more than once. There's preoccupation with the technology over other activities, so they really don't want to do anything else, or the things that they used to do are no longer enjoyable. They don't stimulate them enough. There's an increased usage despite the negative consequences. So they know I shouldn't be doing this because I know I need to go and eat dinner. I haven't eaten well in a few days now, but they'll still do it anyway. There's an inability to regulate and control. They simply can't stop it. Hey, mom, I'll be off in 5 minutes. I'll be off in 5 minutes. Well, now 15 minutes have gone by. Now 20 minutes have gone by. So they have a really hard time being able to stop themselves from being able to use it. And that kind of ties in with the next one in terms of the need for more time or new games to achieve desired mood. Hey, can I have just 10 more minutes? I just want 15 more minutes. So they're never really achieving the mood because they get to it and then they need more. And then, like I say, there can be withdrawal symptoms when they're not actually engaged in it. They may feel like sleeping instead of doing anything else. So these are some of the kinds of, symptoms that you might observe. And then in the next slide, what you see are some of the kinds of psychological, physical, social, and performance effects that it can have. So the idea of what you're looking for is to see, is there a change or a shift in what this person was like before to what they're like right now as a product of using this technology? So do they seem more depressed? Do they seem more anxious? I don't have enough likes on my Instagram account, and so therefore I feel horrible about myself. And with that being said, I'll just sidebar quickly to tell you, you might want to check out Anderson Cooper did a documentary about probably 5-6 years ago called #being13. And it was all about 13-year-olds who are on social media and the effect that it was having on them. And a lot of what's mentioned here psychologically fits the bill with what was observed in those adolescents. In addition, they interviewed the parents and showed just how different what the parents knew was going on in comparison to what the kids were actually doing. And also showing that they have two different personas. So how they present when they're in person live with family and friends is very different from the persona they present when they're online. So, very much something we want to be aware of for any of those of us who are parents or clinicians working with adolescents, or again, Gen Z. And certainly focus issues. One thing we know now is we're seeing more and more where traditionally ADHD has been, typically you're born with it. It's something you're born with, but we're seeing more acquired like ADHD because of the amount of use people are on their technologies. They're not able to focus and attend. And that ties back to the prefrontal cortex again, where attention is very much a part of that center. So those are some of the psychological effects. Physically, all kinds of things. Think about yourself. If you're sitting at a computer for hours at a time, we develop neck issues. Our posturing impacts on how we feel physically. If we're gaming a lot and using our joysticks, that repetitive motion can create a disorder for the person. The vision issues, hearing ophthalmologists now with worry that individuals are going to have macular degeneration at an earlier age in life because of all the blue lighting. So, and sleep deprivation. I participated in a training about a year ago, and the gentleman who presented was talking about his clients, and sleep deprivation and eating was significantly an issue for them. When you're gaming 16 hours a day, you're not eating. Or you're getting fast food because you don't want to stop what you're doing. You're not getting the adequate amount of sleep that you need in order to be fully rested, to give your brain a chance to sort of recover. And he also pointed out having clients who would be so into gaming that they wouldn't even go to the bathroom. They would just keep like a jug by them so that they could just go right there so they wouldn't have to stop their gaming. So that, that's how significant it is with some of these individuals. Certainly that can have ramifications on the family, conflicts between, say, parents who are trying to put limits in place and the individual not wanting those limits. And certainly social isolation as well. They're not getting that in-person one-to-one contact because they're too busy off on their device. And subsequently, because of these things, it can impact performance academically and certainly within the work world. So, and we see this where an individual, they may start off just a little bit of, social media or gaming, and then over time it escalates, possibly because they're trying to escape, maybe they're stressed. And as a result of that, it begins to take over, and then other parts of their life begin to decline. So all of this sounds extremely similar to what you would see in other kinds of addiction. So then when it comes to the risk factors, there is some research out there that has taken a look at this. And, one of the areas we know is traditionally with gender, it's always been assumed that males are more at risk because of the visualization, the gaming and such. But with social media, women are also at risk for this as well. They're just at risk in different ways. In terms of, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I want to talk about personality. There's some characteristics that have been associated, and I want to be clear that none of these risk factors are proven in the sense that they predict tech addiction, but correlations have been found. So more research is needed to look at this further. But some of these include things like a person who tends to be more of a sensation seeker, they need that stimulation and so forth. They may be more inclined. Someone who has more of a neuroticism or anxiety kind of a personality may be more prone. Someone who tends to be take on more responsibility. They have sort of this frame of mind that I have to be in charge of what I do and I've got responsibilities to take care of, is being found to be less inclined. There's less of a correlation for that person. And if you think about it, it sort of makes sense, because if they're the kind of person that takes initiative and has a sense of responsibility, then that may expand into other parts of their lives so they can put more limits, to what they're doing with the technology. Individuals who are seen as being more extroverted are seen to be less inclined to have a risk issue with addiction. So just to highlight a few of the personality characteristics, and those that are more self-directed as well are seen to have less of a likelihood towards, leaning towards this type of addiction. Individuals who are known to be more aggressive or may have impulse issues may be more prone, towards leaning in this way. So that's where when you get into autism, possibly ADHD as another example, or OCD, some of those types of conditions seem to have a correlation towards potential risk as well. And then there's some studies that have looked at family factors, and there are a few things around that which have been examined. So, for example, they have found that one study looked at more authoritarian households versus more authoritative, or defined as more warming. When it's more of an authoritarian household, there seems to be more of a proclivity towards the individual using technology. Single parent family homes may be at greater risk, which in some ways may make sense, because if you think about if you have two parents in the home to kind of monitor the usage and have conversation around that, and if you have a single parent who's working, who can't maybe be on that quite as much, that would certainly possibly make sense. Families where there tend to be more conflict may have more of a correlation towards it. And they've also found that parents who have higher educational attainment tend to have kids who have less potential for tech addiction. So just to highlight a few of the studies and what they're finding in that. And, obviously, as I mentioned before, with depression and anxiety, it can work in both directions. So if you're a person who tends to be anxious and tends to be more depressed, there's a chance you might deviate into the tech, but on the same token, the tech can also promote those things. And socioeconomic status, it's been found lower socioeconomic status seems to be more correlated towards usage as well. So I just wanted to highlight some of those things. And again, all of this is very early, so I would just caution you not to take any of this as the Bible, if you will, but just to be aware and mindful of your own circumstance, or again, if you're working with clients, to maybe ask some additional questions that might help to tease out, is this something we really need to be addressing more so? And then I'm going to talk about some of the treatments, and I want to show one more video clip, and then we're going to end with some online resources. So looking at some of the interventions that are being used, by and large, all these interventions are interventions that have been used with other forms of addiction. Again, whether substance abuse, gaming addiction, like meaning more, going to Las Vegas, that kind of gaming addiction, pornography, all that. These are modalities that have been used, with the exception of a couple of them. Certainly SSRIs are being utilized in terms of medication, but medications are certainly not the end all be all. It's believed, again, here, just like in other forms of addiction, you need the medications in combination with the therapeutic approaches to get the best outcome for the individual. So, and also in this case, physical activity, because again, physical activity, it activates the brain, that counters the way the dopamine works, that can create more of a balance. So physical activity is extremely important. And that is why, with respect to this area, what you're seeing are these nature camps popping up, treatment centers that are housed in the middle of the woods, to try and get them out and get them engaged in using all their sensory systems, separating from the tech. So physical activity being really important. And then some of the therapeutic approaches, which include the motivational interviewing, or the cognitive behavioral therapy, solution focused. These, again, are all approaches that have traditionally been used and showed promise within other forms of addiction. So the assumption is that it will also work within tech addiction as well, but we don't have the data yet to support that. And so while I'm sure there probably will be promise that it will show effect, we need to better understand in what way, because how we use CBT with opioid addiction, it may need to be shifted just a little bit differently in the way we use it for someone that it's a tech addiction. We know that you don't have the risk like opioid addiction of overdosing in the sense that it could kill you, in that respect, quickly like that. But it still has a significant impact on a person's overall quality of life, and can take them in a direction that could be very harmful. So many of those modalities are being looked at, certainly education, and that can also line up with parenting, parent monitoring, helping parents know how to have conversation with their children or their adolescent that's effective. One thing that I was reading in a book by Dr. John Duffy called Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety. We have all these parent apps now that you can put on your child's devices and control how much usage, how much time they get on it, what apps they can go on, what apps they can't go on. And while that is good, it certainly can be beneficial and helpful. Dr. Duffy actually argues that that might not be the best way to go about this, that certainly it allows you to see what they're doing and to have conversation around that. But he really argues more for better communication with your child, and having open dialogue and say, hey, tell me what you did on YouTube today. Oh, did you run into any issues? Or you want to create an honest and open communication with your kids, such that they know they can go to you and not feel like you're trying to control them, especially with adolescents. So the apps might be more beneficial for younger Gen Zers, but when you get into the adolescents, it may be better to really work on communication skills with them and having open, honest dialogue and helping parents to know how to monitor in a way that's effective but not overbearing at the same time. So I think we're going to see a lot of development of trainings that will be around this whole area in terms of that communication and monitoring piece, to help families to know how to helping them in terms of intervening and creating healthy relationships with the technology that is in their home. It is believed that, you can't rely on just one modality. So again, not just the meds, not just one approach therapeutically, but we need a multitude of ways, again, education, parenting intervention, the cognitive interventions, and then the nature camps. Looking at, and we're seeing these pop up. So I mentioned treatment centers. There's a treatment center, the very first one devoted to tech addiction out in Washington State, called I think it's called Restart. Yes, it's called Restart. And it's a 48-day program. So similar to like other addictions, you stay and you work on this to disconnect and recenter yourself, and then learn how to have healthier habits when you return back home again. And then there's another one through an organization called Intenta. That was organized by a gentleman who himself had tech addiction. And so he's been doing a great deal of work to create camps that are for kids that pull them out of it, and give nature and help them learn how to build in their use of technology in a healthy way. These camps recognize that you can't eliminate it. We're never going to be able to eliminate this. We're on the train and we're heading in that direction, but we can help Gen Zers, as well as the rest of us, how to use it in a more effective way. Things like being able to put limits to yourself and say, I can have Facebook for a half an hour and then I'm going to get off of it. I am going to shut off, any of those extra messages that come through to try and encourage me to go further into looking at other sites. I'm going to shut that stuff off so it doesn't, tempt me into looking at it. How do we help to create healthy relationships with the technology? So with that, we have 3:54. So I want to show you another clip. Just give me a moment as I look for it. I may have to pull it up all together. Okay, I'm just going to go straight. It's under 60 minutes. I believe it's this one. I'm going to clip, or I'm going to move to a scene. Bear with me as we get past the ad.
That's right. TurboTax Free Edition is free.
Skip this
free,
ad now.
free.
60
Okay.
minutes.
I just have to look and see. I think it's 2 minutes and 35 seconds in. Oops.
Rewind. And it's a
Oh, wait a minute. That's not the right thing.
Now,
Okay,
this is
I'm
a
sorry.
widespread
Bear with me a
practice, but I
second.
think
This
what's
is
really
not
interesting is
right.
when you find exceptions to this rule, when you find cases of businesses or people in businesses who don't use their own products. Turns out there's one industry where this.
Try this again. Okay, here we go.
It's a familiar sight in households around the world.
So what it is, it's basically showing a woman who is in the process of overcoming her own addiction to tech. This is a woman who's a mother, so it's not actually a Gen Zer, but I think I want you to pay attention to her expressions, listen to the words that she shares and the experience that she's having with this.
It's happening inside Tam Neal's brain.
It's like a tunnel vision. I feel like I lose my sense of peripheral vision, my sense of light. The day could change from day to night and I don't notice. I was a mess. I didn't function like a normal human being. I didn't cope with anything.
It could be the bottle or drugs or gambling, but Tam's talking about her addiction to the internet, especially online gaming. How bad is it?
At the worst, I was gaming for 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop.
Tam was a prisoner of the online world. Married with a young son, her daily life was completely consumed by surfing the internet and playing games like Tetris and Solitaire. So much so, she chose her computer over her family.
Booking a family vacation in a Verbo means leaving all the craziness behind. Well, maybe not all of it. Crazy feels good when it has room to spread out in a vacation home on the beach.
When you were at the worst, how did your life collapse around you?
My son was at a friend's house on a play date, and I knew that if I didn't go and collect him and go home and make dinner and just get on with the evening, that was it. It was going to be over. And I thought, I can't handle that. It's too big. I'm going. And I left and I went internet cafe hopping that night, and I spent the night at an internet cafe. That was the real rock bottom. That was the day that I made the decision that I was going to turn my back on my life and my family and choose gaming. And even though I had hit rock bottom already and I knew how bad things could get, I still chose gaming.
Tam acknowledges she has internet addiction disorder, and if you're skeptical about the diagnosis, then watch this.
Now, you tell me at any stage if you're not comfortable. I'm very much guided by you.
Okay.
To show how she's affected by this addiction and what she does to control it.
Reality becomes like white noise.
Right, so you zone out.
Yeah, I really zone out, and it's like I can't hear anything. And so I feel okay to go into this place today because I'm here with you. You're like my anchor. You're in the real world.
Right. A brave Tam takes us to an arcade full of computer games. Adult versions of what our children encounter on their screens and programmed like poker machines.
Noise and sound and colour. And so it's very hard to explain to people that don't know the physiological response.
Yep.
but I think that it's really important that people can see it, because
In just a few minutes, she becomes a different person, completely overwhelmed by this environment.
well, this is what's wrong. This is why that I'm. Can we move down there a little bit?
Way, come on. I can see you're even clutching at your chest, and it's overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah. I find it hard to focus, and I find it hard to articulate. No, not there. Yeah, I just want to get out of here now.
Let's do it. That is like, a gambler being in a room full of poker machines, or an alcoholic being in a bar.
Yeah.
And I could see you were struggling up there.
The message that I'm hearing is, what's my goal now? Where's the next gold coin? Where's the next bit that I need to pick up, or the key, or it puts me right back into a gaming mentality.
Okay. All right, so we'll stop there. So again, my reason for sharing that with you is to just, we're talking about all of this, but I wanted to at least show you a little clip of someone who's actually living and experiencing this. And I think in that video clip, you could see the distress that she is experiencing, being put into the very setting that creates the addiction for her. And so again, I think we are going to see this make its way into the DSM because of the negative effects that it can have on a person's life. The last slide, and then we'll have just a couple minutes for questions, but the last slide I wanted to show you is, as I had mentioned, there are treatment centers that are beginning to pop up now throughout the country, but it's still relatively limited. And there is actually an Internet and Tech Addiction Addicts Anonymous Association for this, but I will tell you, they don't have that many chapters. There is one in New York City, there's a few in Texas and Florida, so it is, again, pretty young, but certainly a resource that might be beneficial for certain individuals. But in addition to that are a few other resources that you might be interested in looking at. And one is this America Offline. This was created by a guy who was a coach, and he got very concerned when he would ask his baseball players about what they would do when they weren't at practice, and hearing all the issues of concerns around on their phones, their devices. He started this organization as a way, having camps involved in it, but as a way to get kids out of their technology. So there's actually podcasts on there that you can go to and check out that are very useful and helpful. Game Quitters is created by the gentleman that I mentioned before, Cam Adair, who is the one that created Intenta. And Game Quitters is like a support group for people who are trying to quit their gaming habits. And I'm sure that they would probably be open to social media or other kinds of issues too. And it's international. So they get together, ironically online, to at least try to support one another in their efforts to quit some of their some of their addiction. Let me go back really quick. I gotta move this. And then the other two that I'll mention are just online resources that you can go to, actually 3, the netaddiction.com. This is an organization that's based out of, I think it's Bonaventure University. There's a woman up there who this is her whole area of study. And so she has programming up there also. So that's in New York, actually. That's geared towards individuals with addiction, tech addiction. And then online resources, the Center for Internet and Tech Addiction, I'd recommend. And then the last one, the ManhattanNeighbor.org. They have a whole host of books that are listed and other articles that you can go to and read about. One book in particular that's there is called Glow Kids. That is known to be quite good in terms of best understanding the issues of tech addiction and how to help kids overcome that. So with that being said, I have a couple of minutes for questions. If I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. And also to let you know, Tony is going to be emailing all of you the PowerPoint so that you have it. What questions do you have?
Good afternoon, Dr. Midas.
Hi,
This is
how are you?
back when you were talking, you said something about social economic status,
Mhm.
and I think that it's the opposite, because parents who have more money are capable of buying their children. You can have an iPad, you can have a Chromebook, you can have the Nintendo Switch, you can have PlayStation 5 and everything like that. The way I've kind of kept my children away from this is because I wouldn't buy them these devices. But when their school gave them devices so that they can do remote learning, then that helped them go on this 24/7. And when their uncle would buy them iPhones and stuff like that, I wouldn't do it. Not that I didn't have the money for it, I just wasn't going to do it, because my mind was not to spend money on that type of stuff. It was to focus on other more important things. So
Sure.
I more the other side.
Yeah, I mean, Atan, my hunch is as we get more research, there will probably be something that will show that as well. What I saw in terms of the socioeconomic status is that they may not have access to a lot of the things that people who are in an upper level of socioeconomic status, they may not be able to afford to send their child to a camp. So the go-to is your phone, because everybody has a phone. Not everybody, but you know, the idea is that many people have a phone. So even if they can't necessarily afford to go to a camp or have other kinds of extracurricular activity, they can at least have their phone. So I think that's where it's coming in on the socioeconomic status. But I think, again, it's early and we have a lot more to learn. So my hunch is there'll be evidence to support what you're saying too. So, Vivian?
Hi. Well, I come from the addictions world, and with drugs, the faster the high, the faster the low, the faster the addiction. So this gets imprinted very quickly. And one of the things that I have found tragic in the last number of years is watching parents not parent, but rather I'll talk to my girlfriend, so I'll give the kid the phone, or I'll be on the phone, so I'll give the kids some kind of device so I don't have to pay attention. And one thing that got me absolutely heartbroken was I was in the park once and I saw a caregiver. Clearly it was not her child. She was a nanny, and the boy was maybe 2, and she was on her phone and he was trying to get her attention and trying to get her attention. And after a while, he just gave up and he just stood there like this lost boy with this vacant look. And I think that that's a tragedy, that they used to say, you know, the TV was the idiot box, and, you know, yeah, do you put your kids in front of Sesame Street? Yeah, but there's a big difference between an hour of Sesame Street and this constant, you know, fix. Like, and with the online gambling is another area where, okay, so they give you $100 for free of whatever, and then, but that instant click, the faster it goes. You don't even have to, if you were in the casino, you don't even have to go and get your chips. Now you swipe a card, or and it's so the addiction is just that much quicker.
Yeah. And the thing that's a little different too is that, remember, we're focusing on Gen Z, but this cuts across all ages, you know. And so that's one of the difference about, not everybody has access to opioids. Many people have access to technology. So, you know, so you may have a parent that's getting sucked into it while the child is observing that, and then the child gets sucked into it. So I think we have to really be mindful of that when we're providing therapy, and be careful. You know, we have to watch not to judge, you know, also, because I think that can be very easy to do. But it is an issue for sure, you know, in terms of what you're saying. So.
And the idea of with COVID and all the online learning is reinforcing and reinforcing. And it kind of like reminds me with working with eating disorders and how they affect people from a very, very, very young age, because you can't get opioids when you're 5.
Right.
But, and just like with food, where you can't just put the cork in the bottle, with the electronics, I mean, how many of us would give our phones up? There was I don't know what's his name, Stephen Dewey. He's now at Hofstra, I think, still, Dr. Stephen Dewey. Anyway, he was out with Brookhaven National Labs, and he's very renowned in the area of addictions. And he gets all this research money to do these different studies, and he gets thousands upon thousands of people that want to get into his studies. And he always has to turn away most of them. He said he tried to do a study with teenagers and giving up their phones. And he kept on narrowing it down for a shorter period. He couldn't get anybody that was willing to give up their phones, even for a few days.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, thank you, Vivian. So, you know, unfortunately, I don't have time to answer more questions, but what I would like to do is encourage you to email me if you would like to shoot a question my way. So if you have a paper and a pen in hand, I will give you my email address, and I can certainly entertain that way. It's JAMIE.MITUS@hofstra.edu. So certainly I welcome any questions you may have that way. And Tony put it into the chat box too, so you've got it there as well. But I want to thank you all for coming today. And again, I hope you know a little more now than you knew at the beginning. And I wish you all the best. So take care.